Hey everyone, can everybody hear me? Okay. If you can't at any point, just say something. In fact, just say things when you want to say things this evening, because I want this to be very much an opportunity for discussion, and I'm very pleased to say that there's at least one person in the room who knows a lot about some of the things that I'm going to be talking about this evening, which I'm so delighted that somebody can bear witness to the things that I'm saying. So thank you ever so much for making this trip out this evening, because I know that it's perishingly cold and it's dark, but I'm really hoping that there'll be things that we can share this evening that will be of interest. And certainly looking around the walls, there's some magnificent, absolutely incredible things happening in this space. So even being in this space this evening, I'm sure is going to be stimulating and inspiring on lots of different registers. So my name's Adele Patrick, and you'll be hearing a little bit about, I suppose, my relationship to a particular form of feminist technology. I'm claiming it as a feminist technology. Of course, it's a technology that everybody was using all these hundreds of years ago. But before we get stuck into this evening properly, I just wanted to sort of extend a massive thank you to Sophia and to this absolutely elite, amazing team here at Cooper Gallery. I mean, it is quite astonishing seeing the publicity material coming through and hearing a little bit about what's cooking here. I'm always like, how unbelievable, you know, this is world-class stuff that's happening. And I'm really delighted to be invited to this particular programme. And I suppose sort of acknowledging the years of conscientious research and curatorial work and programming that's been undertaken by Sophia. So I feel like we're really, really lucky to have her still in Scotland, because she could be, you know, lured away anywhere all over the world. So we really are lucky to have this work and this incredible expertise in Scotland just now. So and I suppose personally I wanted to say that because it's been absolutely critical for, as it were, like elders like myself and others who've been involved, as I say, including people that I know are in the room this evening, to have this sort of serious sort of attention to what is quite scrappy bits of work. Some bits are missing, you know, there's gaps, there's flawed stuff there, you will see some of the material is, these are fragile remnants of stuff, and to have somebody really pay attention to this is really, really important for these sort of, I suppose, having this broader understanding about histories of making and histories of organising and histories of activism. So I really do appreciate that this work is being done in almost like this sort of like longitudinal fashion. So this is not just sort of like I'm doing it and then on to something else. There's a beautiful, wonderful continuity to a lot of this work. So I know that Sophia extended this invitation to me now, you know, I'm still alive and in my capacity as somebody who's now in a sort of like leadership role in Glasgow Women's Library. Has anybody visited the library, by the way?
Yeah.
So there's a fair few people who know about the library. Thank you ever so much for visiting, and a warm welcome to anyone else who's in the room who hasn't visited the library. You know, I really do encourage you to come along. And I suppose that's great to be invited in that capacity, but I suppose also I've got a little bit of an opportunity this evening to sort of try and think a little bit about what it felt like to be in Glasgow in the mid-80s, in a different time space altogether, in a pre-digital time, in a time where the idea of the library, I suppose, had not even been conceived of. So I'm going to sort of talk a little bit about, I suppose, the way that slide images almost like are laced together in my memory, flawed memory, personal memories, instances and moments that link the idea of myself as a sort of like artist designer in Glasgow in the mid-1980s, working alongside lots of other people associated with Glasgow School of Art, but also extending out into other institutions who were pissed off to different degrees about the educational offer at the time, but at the same time inspired by being in this constellation, you know, within the institution as well. So these ambivalent feelings about institutions, can we make institutions, or we're going to make institutions, regardless of the fact that we don't know anything about that, anything about how to do that. So some of the material that I'm going to be showing predates this sort of idea of the incubation of the Women's Library. And as I say, link some interesting sort of counter-cultural, would probably say, but non-institutional sort of like gatherings around images like the images that I'm going to be showing a sample of, through the development of Women in Profile, which was almost like the organisation that ended up giving rise to the Women's Library and into the early Women's Library. So I won't be doing it, and then we did that, and then we did that, and then we did, you know, that type of thing. There's plenty of information on Gina Ruel's website and a bit on my own website that will sort of like fill in some gaps there. But I just thought it might be quite good just to, because I have a tendency to sort of over-prepare for talks, and I thought I will under-prepare. But almost like honouring the idea of the sketchiness of these original slide meetings that I wanted to sort of start with. So I'm hoping that it will be slightly uncomfortable for me, but I hope it won't be too uncomfortable for you to sort of like have some things come up that are uncut or, you know, sort of not nicely polished. So slides themselves, I wondered if I could ask, has anybody used slides or handled slides? So there are a few people who have, but there's certainly a few people who haven't. Would people like to handle a couple of slides? I've got a couple of slides here. And I thought I would pass them round because they are a haptic, you know, they are thin, they're noisy, and they're clunky, and they're different to any other sort of like technology. But what's interesting to me about these slides is that when recently, I'm going to show you quite a few slides, but we did actually have a little piracy type session in Women's Library a wee while ago, and I'll talk a little bit more about how that came about, where we showed about a dozen slides. And that's when I found out that some people don't know what slides are or haven't handled them. But we had a really brilliant intern working with us at the time, a student on placement, and she'd not had awful much contact with me and was trying to work out a little bit more about what slides were for. In fact, I'd spoken to her for about an hour before I realised she didn't know actually how they were used or anything. I'd been talking about different concepts and yeah, but what are they? You know, what are they? What are these slides? But she'd actually been trying, because she was an information sort of management person, she'd actually been trying to work out, there's some writing on that's very cryptic on these slide mounts, and she'd been Googling for goodness knows how many hours to try and work out what these were, and she didn't realise that I'd actually made these slides, but I'd actually found in a skip a huge volume of slides And because we were so skint at the time, I'd actually pulled the slide cases off. These are quite good quality slides. They've got a nice little glass sheen on them. I'd actually pulled these slides off and recycled these slide mounts. So the actual text on them is, I think it's from a lawyer's firm that went bankrupt, in the mid-80s. So I suppose the sort of idea of the slippage of time and how others might be trying to read or not read these types of things was instructive in thinking about this. So I wonder whether we could, the slide can get passed around, especially for those who have not had a go at slides before, but I suppose I wanted to talk a little bit about, one thing I suppose is about the quality of some of these images is really, really ropey. And often when I've been looking at the texts that are associated with UK feminist or British feminist art making, in the second wave onwards, and then looking at the documentation by US feminist artists, it is like chalk and cheese. When you look at something like The Power of Feminist Art, and when you look at some of like Griselda's first book or whatever, you're looking at really, really poorly documented and really badly photographed materials. And then in the American context, I was astonished when I saw how much beautiful film documentation there were of some of Woman House and all these other germinal feminist moments. Not that everything was documented, but there certainly was an idea of documentation going down that was very, very different from the types of things that we were doing in the 1980s. I don't know whether, I don't want to sort of land on Jane, but I keep looking over because Jane is actually, I'm sure I'm a lot older than Jane, but we were contemporaries in terms of women in profile. But so I'm looking over for some reassurance because the mind plays tricks. But certainly we were not prioritising documenting each other's work to an nth degree. We didn't have any money to do that. And the kit was really, really poor. But also some of these slides, this is a work by Claire Collinson, who sent us slides to the Women's Lab and was not active in the slide meetings that I'm going to speak about in a second. But this work really impressed me when it arrived in Women's Library, Women in Profile, because it was clearly an artist who had taken some time to think about documentation. But I think a lot of the work that we're going to be seeing was stored in smoky, dusty, damp places. It was used hundreds of times in different settings, including shown in homes where there were, lots of people smoking roll-ups and other things. But used in club settings, used in countless lectures. So I'm going to talk about the way that some of the slides have been used in very different contexts. But these are sort of like, they weren't used in a pristine way. They were used in a very, very hands-on, activist-type way. So I suppose what we're thinking about here are images that are, I suppose there's another artist who did take time to document well, so some of you will recognise Sam Ainsley's work, who's well represented, and I know that Sam has been involved with Sophia in lots of different elements of this sequence of work. But I suppose the idea of, why are we using these things? This was the principal way that those who were making art could show others their art. So if you were thinking about visiting a pal in London or going to see other people or sharing images, some of these works that I'm going to be showing you, that one, there's no way that you can take that image, and obviously you can photograph, but there's something about, for us at the time, I think the saturation of the colour, and looking at these now, they look so dull, they look so sort of like, compared to digital images, the Instagrammable images. But for us, these were luminous, technical, absolutely absorbing and beautiful, jewel-like things, you know. And we could project these things onto surfaces, walls, at any scale and so on and so forth. So there's something really, really wonderfully absorbing and brilliant about seeing work at this scale. And this sort of idea of them being transportable and usable in lots of different contexts. So I was trying to think about the time when I first started using slides, and I knew about the Women Artists Slide Library in London. I could never join because I couldn't afford to, you had to pay a certain amount to have your slides in Women Artists Slide Library. I did visit Women Artists Slide Library, but feminists clearly, you know, been thinking about ideas to do with archiving our work and collecting work in that systematic way of slide library. And lots of people understood that at the time. So Hilary Robinson was in Glasgow at the time. There was a feminist currency and understanding about slides as documentation for feminists. But I was trying to remember, Jane, the name of Lynn, the technician at the art school. Do you remember Lynn's surname? Anything that's missing from my brain this evening, I'm going to pass on to Sophia for any nerd who might be interested in chasing these things up. But Lynn was a critical person because she was one of the tiny number of women working at the art school at the time, and implausibly in a technical area. So she was the tech person, first of all for the architecture department, which was mind-blowing, given that there were no women at all in the architecture department. And I mean no women students. There were a handful of women in the planning department, but I mean now it's a completely different, transformed field. But Lynn was always very supportive and ended up aiding and abetting me in what became mass slide making, you know, illegally, we might say, or I don't know, certainly wrongly exploiting the slide making facilities within the Historical and Critical Studies department at Glasgow School of Art, where I ended up teaching for a period of time. So that's when it moved into industrial scale slide making. So anybody I knew who needed slides made, or certainly with every text that was published about women's art or feminist art, I would make slides, and you're going to see some of the slides that I made. But I was also making slides there for, even before I started teaching at the art school, Lynn would make me slides of things that we could use in fundraising or party situations as well. So I wanted to mention a little bit, I suppose, about the build-up to Women in Profile, which is, as I say, the organisation that gave rise to the library, by showing a few images of some of the artists who were sharing work at gatherings that started. I suppose this is where my head goes to when I'm thinking about slides, about setting up almost like an alternative criticism sessions, because we were dissatisfied with the levels of discussion. Almost like the literacies around feminism were non-existent within the art school at the time. There was absolutely no discussion. I know that Sam Ainsley was trying to introduce those discussions, but in terms of anyone else teaching there, I don't know, Jane, whether you had any. I have nothing at all.
My first experience was when we were in France and talked to us.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about a desert in terms of any of the types of discussions, and again, just sort of thinking about how lucky you are how lucky you are today. But I mean, to have Sophia, to have all the riches that are available now in terms of thinking about some of these issues. So I suppose we were thinking like, well, how do we talk about our work? Because some of these things are bubbling up in work, and there are other literacy is being developed outside the academy. So that's really when I was sort of thinking, you know, like, oh, I'll have something in my house, and unfortunately others said that they would host things in their houses, so it became very much more like a collective endeavour. But slides were the currency, slides were the way. I don't remember very many instances. I do remember people showing some drawings, but it was largely through slides that we were able to have these conversations about work in progress. So, and I wanted to include this on because Julie Roberts, unfortunately, there are two Julie Roberts who become involved in this period, and this is Julie Roberts, painter, but also there's Julie Roberts who's a sculptor. Both of them got involved in Woman House, which again leads to difficulties in terms of provenance and works and so on and so forth. But Julie was one of the artists who did come along to some of the slide criticism meetings, and then you saw some of these artists actually getting involved in Women in Profile, and Woman House and other projects that ended up sort of getting fermented. So there was also an opportunity for us to send slides internationally as well. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So so I just thought I would randomly show the work by Julie Roberts actually dates from 1989. And this work, Sink Jelly, 1988, is by another artist that some of you may well have come across, Christian Borland. So that's 1988, and it's on the slide it says Belfast Sink Jelly. So I really need to ask Christine, you know, like, can she remember? Because in my head that is the part of the Her Stories Women's Aid exhibition, but I've got a feeling that it might be Woman House, but that is missing from this slide. So there's all these sorts of like, you know, I was around, but I can't remember. So there's a whole body of work to be done with this material. I wanted to show you as well, like, there are a couple of artists there who are fairly well known. In fact, I don't know if you recognise this, Jem, but this is Jackie Donahue, who I now know is based in Dundee. And what's really interesting to me there is, not that it's great work and it's an interesting work, but on it says slide meeting, and it's at my house, and it says December the 1st. And that's significant to me because it's my birthday, and I thought, what was I doing? You know, and I suppose there's that idea of absolute no boundaries whatsoever between living our lives and doing this stuff. I mean, it's just like a permeated everything. There's no sort of like demarcation. There's no self-care going on. I'm saying that as though that's a cynical bit. Self-care, do it, you know, like, absolutely do it. But there was nothing, there was no boundaries at all there. So, but it's significant to me that on the slide it is on my birthday. Maybe there was no better way of celebrating than hanging out with a load of feminist, very, very angry artists. At the time, what changes? Nothing. But yes, I wanted to show a couple of slides because I suppose there are some well-known artists there, but then the other day I looked into this really fantastic woman called Liana Malata, and Liana had been working at the Glasgow Film Theatre for some time and introduced me to her remarkable mum, who was called Maria Malata. And I still feel like Maria Malata is one of the absolute most brilliant outsider artists, or artists who are not conventionally trained. Like, there were loads of artists who I've come across who had not had that art school background. So we invited Maria. It was one meeting that Maria came to. I'm really chuffed that I heard from Liana the other day that finally, unfortunately, Maria's died, but she's got this massive body of work, including outside of poetry and just the most astonishing collection. But I think that might now be collected by Goma. That feels as though it might be happening at last. But we included Maria in this publication that I'm going to circulate in a second. You know, so there's something about including everyone as well. So it wasn't about, well, who are the artists who are in the know here? You know, who are the ones who are learned in feminism or have read particular things or whatever. It was very, very much like a inclusive setup. So there were other really beautiful, you can see that I've made this, you can see how hairy it is and how bits of lint and fluff are all over this thing. I've not been preserving that, it's just the way that these things are, you know, and actually the carousel is full of dust and everything else. But you can see I've copied that from Griselda's, this is one of the illicitly made slides from the art school. But when I saw Sheila Cameron's work, you know, these are the types of things I'd started collecting and thinking were really amazing. And fortunately, my mum knew Shirley Cameron and still knows Shirley Cameron, and you know, I know Shirley Cameron as well. So these are stalwart. And so when we came to do Women in Profile, we invited this artist in our naivety. You know, it's just like, oh, they're brilliant. They're probably in Britain. I'll invite them. So that was the case with Bobby Baker, that was the case for Joe Spence, that was the case for, you know, Matrix Architects, all these, because they were amazing, and we just sort of thought we'll invite them to Women in Profile. So we're trying to show some things as well together, or very much more informally as well, that people would let each other know about these things. And then I wanted to include another image here. I know that there are hundreds and hundreds of these images, by the way. I was just sort of trying to think about, I suppose, ways that these things were being used. So some of the images I've just shown you are things that other artists were bringing to slide meetings, things that were being sent, things that we were capturing and sharing together. But also, in the very early 80s, I got a chance to go to the States, and I actually took loads of slides from women who have been coming along to slide meetings to America to show, I won't go into the big long story, but I actually took a load of slides to show in different institutions. But while I was there, I was capturing slides and buying slides in galleries and bringing them back as well. And this was one of the astonishing things. I don't know if people know about the work of Judy Backer. I mean, obviously, Judy Chicago, and you know, there's some sort of figures that obviously I was going to be interested to make a connection with. But I really, really liked street works and graffiti works and other things were just really, really starting up. So this is a tiny detail from Judy Backer's Great Wall mural, the Great Wall of Los Angeles. I was trying to see whether I'd taken a little note of how many miles, but it involved 400 young people and their families working on this work. So it's quite interesting to me, this sort of idea of feminist leadership or not leadership, you know, like I could never quite work out, you know, like is Judy Chicago a leader or not? You know, it's a collaborative work, but is everybody acknowledged? And, you know, Judy Backer was another one of those figures for me. I mentioned Judy Chicago, but I think this is probably, Sophie and I have a shared love of the Cock and Cunt period of Woman House. So we don't know, there is a record somewhere of who these participants are, and the Woman House, totally germinal, totally amazing, second wave feminist, sort of, I suppose, incubation space or crucible for lots of really, 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 really important feminist artists, feminist art. And I'm using this slide because although it's one that obviously I was interested in and fascinated by and really outraged in a great way and inspired by very, very early on, I suppose its significance is that when there's that shift from slide meetings and other things that people are clearly thinking about outside any network that I was involved in, I really remember distinctly that that the moment where myself and Jane and others were literally putting up signs in the student union type of premises at the art school, I think that above the Vic Bar, just to sort of, and putting the word out to say, if anybody's interested in getting involved in this thing, was a cool woman in profile at the time. There are lots of different things that you might want to be interested in. Here's some samples, and in a totally brazen, naive way, I put up Woman House. Could there be a Glasgow Woman House? You know, because I'd heard about Woman House. And fortunately, Cathy Wilkes and Rachel Harris and the other Julie Roberts were amongst the women who said, oh, we'd be interested in that, we'd like to, and then ran with it. You know, it was entirely their project, but I know that that was something that was known to us. Rachel actually did contact Judy Chicago, as you know, to get her blessing to do a Woman House in Castlemilk. And I think Judy Chicago was quite keen on the idea of ensuring that the copyright wasn't infringed, and she was a bit nippy around it. But yeah, I suppose it's just sort of thinking about these different constellations of images and the ways that these things could arrest the imagination in a particular way. And I suppose that, another figure for us was Linda Sterling, and I wanted to put this slide in because, again, I suppose, I know I'm a bit fangirly with Sophie just now, but I am quite astonished about what's happening here and just so in awe. And at one of these gatherings that Sophie organised quite recently, if you can imagine, from the early 80s, I'm showing this slide in all different contexts in the art, when I ended up working in the art school and, in lots of different ways. And then I discovered that Sophie's got Linda in the house here. Do you know what I mean? And it's the one and only time I actually brought something to get signed by an artist, and just sort of said to Sophie, what does she look like? Where is she? Do you think she'll sign it? So go on, she's holding it, go on, But just this idea of, I suppose, not having anything to see live. You could see Sam's work once in the CCA or the Third Eye Centre, but there weren't really things that we could go and see. There weren't works you could see anywhere. They weren't collected, certainly not in Scotland. I know that we're sitting here looking at a Maud Salter, and the first show's really coincident with 1990 when we're doing our work, but I mean it's just so infinitesimally rare instances of seeing any significant work. I suppose that's why the States blew my mind in the way that it did. And I do actually have an image of Maud Salter, but how long has it taken really for Maud to start to get any type of recognition? I mean, just the sort of idea that Angela Davis and Jackie Kane conversation it's always staying with me now during COVID times when they were talking about holding patience and impatience for change simultaneously. The fact that we need to be in that mindset when we're thinking about some of the things that these artists are teaching us and articulating in their practice. I did want to circulate this, but this is a scruffy little reproduction from our now extremely well-valued newsletters that was circulating when Women in Profile really starts movement. I'm going to sort of pass one to this side. And actually, I hope you don't mind, Jane, but I should say that Jane actually designed the cover of the second one. Is probably responsible for maybe some of the things that you see in there, but you'll see one of the reasons I wanted to circulate it is like, I suppose it's just this sort of, like, it's got women in profile then, but the slide criticism meetings are still happening, so there's this sort of funny sweet spot really where there's a movement into actually organising, not just sort of meeting and more in a consciousness raising style, you know, way, but and a sort of railing against the lack of criticism and trying to help each other, but actually trying to organise. But also, I don't know if it's on there, I think it is, how astonishing that we'd got our phone numbers and addresses on, you know, like, it's just like now, I suppose in these more culture warring times, you wouldn't necessarily put your phone number on and all your other details. But yeah, I suppose this movement into women in profile and the so I thought this was quite interesting because this is in Dalhousie Lane, which is the unbelievably manky, really just super grungy. So you're talking about no windows, no toilet to begin with. Some of you have heard me enumerating these things before, but just in case people need to know and don't know, you know, no heating. Obviously no phone. You know, I think we organised the whole of the Women in Profile Festival without a phone. So I think it's one of the reasons why I'm now phobic around phones. It was the phone in that thing that's gone around, it was a pay phone in my flat. So every time the phone rang, I had to run down the stairs because I was in the attic with Kate Henderson, and then the phone was on the next level where other people live. And I was really worried each time the phone rang that they would be disturbed. So now Mum was like Pavlov's dogs every time the phone rings, but from that period. But I suppose what's interesting to me, uncovering some of these slides, because a lot of these we've not seen since then. I mean, they were just languishing, a lot of these slides, until we started looking at our own history. The period, like, through 2021, when we're really starting to think that's 30 years, so we really now need to be doing some reflective work on our history. Colleagues were tasked, who weren't there, were tasked with really organising that. So it could be people who are not like me, could be sort of dispassionately or more critically going through the material. So one of my colleagues uncovered all these thousands of slides and thought it would be quite a good project for the students to be working on. So some of these I'm only just really looking at, having had this invitation. So this is great. We've obviously got one of these portable heaters, God knows where we've got it, but they are not pat tested. Any of the things that are plugged into the wall there are probably deeply dangerous. But there are artworks sitting around the space. You know, I think it's quite interesting that people were making art. Do you recognise this work, Jane? I wondered if it was Christine Howitt's, or I think it might be, but again, there's work to be done here. But there are some images of, that's a very, very cool one. But I wanted to show this one, and there's actually one after it as well, because this is the start of the women's library. You know, so this is just towards the end of the Women in Profile period, where people have given us loads and loads of stuff. It's almost like we had to do this thing because people were giving us stuff, giving us slides, giving us catalogues, giving us materials, and we'd actually started boxing up some of the journals and magazines that people had given us as well. So, and then this thing here is a relic from one of the fundraising events that I'm going to show you as well. So it's quite lovely to see that we were, for some bizarre reason, using slides as documentation as well. You know, so goodness knows why we were doing that, but fortunately we did. And I wanted to show this as well, because you get a good idea of the skankiness. So you've got rolled up carpet, and this is Kate Henderson, who set up the Women's Library with us, chopping up wood because we didn't have any heating, and one of my pals brought from London in a car a wood-burning stove for us to keep us warm. So for all the period of time we were there, we were skip breaking for wood and sawing it up and burning it in the wood burning to keep warm. And this, just for those nerds who need to know these things, this bench here, which looks startlingly new and fancy, that was given to us by Robbie Coltrane. I mean, not a lot of people know that. But I just wanted to show you know, how rudimentary this space was. And then in amongst the slides as well, we were very much a part of the Garnet Hill community. You know, so in the Garnet Hill Community Cafe that's in the background, were two amazing gatekeepers of the local community. And these slides here, again, why we documented it, I don't know, but there's very many of them. And this is improbably from World UN Day, which for some bizarre reason the Garnet Hill Community Council celebrated each year. And we've clearly been asked to do something. So there's this really, you know, that just in terms of sort of like, we're not fibrown feminists who don't, you know, sully ourselves with any like UN, this, that and the other, whatever. We're like, do you know what, Betty, you've asked us to do something here, we'll do something. So a whole bunch of lesbians and like, you know, people who were radical feminists and all that sort of thing. We held a big drumming session outside in Garnet Hill, and I just really like these slides, just in terms of, I suppose, this idea. I mean, nobody was paying us to do anything. The first 10 years, none of us were paid to do anything, but I suppose that idea of like an interest to be part of the community and an interest to be involved, and you know, is evident in a lot of the records that we've got here. So that's Kate in the checkered shirt on the right hand side. Me and me double denim. Wasn't fashionable then, still not fashionable now. But I love this image actually. So there aren't awful many images of me because I was taking photos and also I don't like having a photo taken. But this is our shelving system. You can see that it's like hugely precarious in the old dollhouse space. But I really like this because that's an image of Kate photographing me. So it's like, well, I was not the only person documenting, that Kate here, the other co-founder, and here is our Amstrad. So we're really starting to, you know, get involved in very high-tech work in this space. And I noted recently, I suppose I wanted to sort of mention something because I know everybody's interested in the art, but for me, I just sort of feel like there's some really, really interesting work that needs to be done about how the work gets made and how the community of creatives gets sustained in this period. And right from the get-go, we were fundraising because we had no money, we had no grants, we had no support from the council, there was no revenue stream, there's nothing. So we had to make it work. So this is at the Riverside Club, and there's women in profile posters in the background. But some of you may well have seen this film that's been out recently. Have you seen it, Jane?
I've seen it yet.
With
Jackie Bradley.
yeah. Oh wow, amazing. So there's a real confluence of artists. So the women who are involved in Strawberry Switchblade were at the art school with us, and you know, there's a lot of compliments. Gilly White, who was like a really, really close friend of mine and involved in Women in Profile, was in a band called Party Susan, which is in Yes, exactly. She was a trumpet player. But this group, I'm really interested. I'm going to see the film because this is the Sticky Pinks, and I've never seen. I would be interested to see whether they made the cut in this new documentary about the emerging women's punk scene, because I don't think so. You know, so that they are performing in 1989 for us. You know, there's Lockhead's doing work. There's all these supportive people, Jackie Kay and others are helping us at this stage, and these things have been documented, and some of the things that we're doing are more edgy than others, and I'm going to go on to sort of show you a couple of things, but you'll see in the background this is slightly meta because we've started sort of using different types of logos or identities or whatever. I'm going to talk a little bit about it in a second, but there's this sort of like profile that's on the thing that I circulated. And we're actually using a slide of that image to project onto an old sheet and then to make banners from it. And I'm going to show you in a second the way that appears in other work. And we're also doing, this is one in a sequence, but in order to make money, we would capitalise on lesbian fangirl culture or other things. So I remember making a slide at the art school and then projecting that onto sheets in the old Dalhousie space, and we would paint that and flog them to people who had more money than sense in order to make some money. So this is sort of like, I'm just sort of thinking about all the different ways that we use slides. So you can see there this logo. So this, Rachel Harris gave me a little, a newsprint, a lead newsprint anonymous thing that she'd found somewhere, and I made a little print of it, and that became the logo. So it got used in all these settings. So this was another fundraiser called the Auction of Pleasures at the art school, and we did raise quite a bit of money at that. And I really like the way that slides are being used here as well. Not just we're making slides that allowed us to make banners and things like that, but we're projecting them at events like this where we have no cost, you know, we have no budget to do things. So slides start to get used. So you can see here we're using an image from the Glasgow Girls. So simultaneous to our incubating Women in Profile on the Women's Library, 2 minutes down the road, Jude Birkhauser is doing her research on the Glasgow Girls, which is women working in Glasgow 1880 to 1920. And we gave each other a hell of a lot of support. She was incredibly supportive of us, and she was having an absolutely shit time trying to get that project going at the art school. So, but for us it was this incredible idea that there was this coterie of women who had virtually been erased from history, and it took somebody from outside Glasgow to sort of really say, actually, there was something really interesting happening there. So there's a real wonderful synergy about this sort of, it was reinforcing this idea that we had to save things, we had to document things, we had to preserve and conserve things. And you can see in some of the images of these fundraising events, we're appropriating imagery from second wave feminist activism in the States as well. So this is from a demonstration where women, you know, enforced smiling. So there was a sort of, you probably know from feminist campaigning, you know, this idea of refusing to smile as a sort of political act, you know, that women, you know, was required to do this thing. So, you know, we're using these images in dances and fundraisers. So that is one of the original sort of slides that we were projecting or painting them, making the curtains in the original women's library, you know, and used in lots of different events. And the course, these are, again, me in the art school trying to think about what are the slides how many slides will we have to make to go along with disco music in the art school, you know, like for an event, and dreading one of my colleagues coming into the copy stand area and just sort of thinking, why is Adele, you know, I was part-time lecturer by that time, one day a week, and I'd only got 3 or 4 courses in the whole year. I'd been carrying in 300 books, you know, and whatever. Anyway, I suppose, you know, it's just trying to find images of powerful women, interested, you know, that we could use in this particular way. And I've included these images as well because at the time I would say that you would imagine that we were getting a lot of support from transmission, or we were getting a lot of support from the Glasgow Print Studio, or from almost like there would have been that sort of solidarity, and that was not my memory. I remember us protesting against transmission's wholly male roster of artists, you know, and that did change, but there was not that support available to us. It wasn't like we were collaborating and working in partnership in the way that we are now doing all the time in the Women's Library. We were working on our own a lot of the time. But what I did note is that Malcolm Dixon, because it's on the slide, Malcolm Dixon had given us, for the Auction of Pleasures, at the Auction of Pleasures, we were auctioning pleasures, so we were looking for pleasures wherever we could get them to sort of flock to people. And I noticed that he had given us 3 copies of Variant to auction, which, you know, love Malcolm. But that's evidence of his support at street level at the time. One of the other pleasures was getting your head shaved. So we would have to stage photographs in order to be able to raise the money. We'd have to have images of the things that were going to be done. So this is artist Laura Hudson having a head shaved for a photo shoot to sort of promote the idea of, if you give us money, we'll shave your head. This is how lacking in resources we were, and how kind people were to sort of actually participate in this ridiculous thing. The other way that we were raising money was by having completely bizarre stage productions of things. And this is one of the events that we did, which was called Panto Most Horrid. And it was a lesbian panto. We did 2 different versions of it in that really skanky premises in Dalhousie Lane. And just in terms of, I suppose, health and safety and risk assessments and things like that, I mean, candles, no licence, selling booze, all that type of thing. And this is me dressed as one of the 3 little pigs performing in Panto Most Horrid. But I suppose this is sort of like a lovely, I suppose, anarchic, you know, like I can, when I look at this and I'm thinking about, I suppose you know, presumptuous enough to sort of be thinking about Woman House or whatever, but there's something about the totally, I don't give a toss type of sense, and like, we are just doing whatever we want to do here, you know, and that it's just a really lovely vibe when I'm looking at some of these images of us carving something completely new that wasn't happening elsewhere. These are, I know that one of these is on display at Sophie, again, in a leap of imagination, thought it was okay to do this, and I'm quite astonished when these things happen. But another way that we were trying to raise money was by making these buttons that people could buy. So I made the one on the top right hand corner. The one next to me on the left was designed by Kathy Wilkes. And then the one on the left after that was by Rachel Harris, and it's actually made out of fish heads. So you imagine everybody's making these things in their house, and I remember the stench of those fish heads being made. Did you make one, Jane?
I do remember making one.
Do you recognise
I don't know
any?
if it's in there, but I remember just, yeah, I remember the idea. What's those blue and white kind of the pottery? It's particularly kind of pottery that was usually one in profile face.
Yeah, that's right. I don't think we have one of those. So somebody, Rowan actually found the one on the top right and kind of one of those recently and donated it into the collection. But I suppose there's just this sort of idea of the industry required to actually, generate the money was there. I did want to mention a little bit about what happened during the 1990s as well, because I keep mentioning about women in profile, and I suppose the reason why we wanted to do a big festival of work was that I think in the mid-80s we'd heard that Glasgow was going to be European City of Culture, and I think by that time a lot of us are thinking that if we don't do something during that period then it will be a pale milestone affair. And we knew that lots of people would be visiting Glasgow, and we wanted to make sure that there were women's work and creative work in the mix. So hence Woman House, Women's Own Annual, which I'm going to speak a little bit about. Lots of different things. There was the Her Stories of Women's Aid that Susan Montford took a lead in. And then there was Photo Works, which I think was an amazing body of work that Laura Hudson and Louise Bradley and loads of other women were involved with. And I found some of the slides that were associated with Photo Works, and I noticed that this is Fran Cattell and Louise Bradhead. And just sort of like looking at Fran Cattell, what Fran Cattell went on to do in her practice, I think it's really interesting sometimes when these early incidents are not cited in people's CVs. I've noticed this in other settings as well, where there's a little vacuum where maybe you would have thought maybe by now there might have been mentioning this. So it's just really interesting whether they've forgotten, because it was like seat of the pants stuff. But I think it would be really great just to reconnect with some of the women who were involved. So this was actually some of the crew that were involved in the Photo Works project. So I wanted to put up the figure on the right, next to the pillar, is Julie Roberts, the painter, and actually on the left-hand side, next to the spoons, I think is Kathy Wilkes, and then Laura, who had her head shaved, the artist, is sort of standing in between them. And just very briefly, I suppose it's not very well documented, but the main exhibition that we had that drew on the women who were participating in the slide sessions was called the Women's Own Annual, and I'm going to pass this round so you've got an idea. So you can see the same logo here. This was produced again by sneaking into the art school through, it was Ken Mitchell who taught at the art school, who was a friend of Rachel Harris. And he gave us a key into the art school to get in the middle of the night, and which you just imagine now, and we're all smoking fags and all that sort of thing. There's no jammies around or whatever. We got in and we typeset this over a period of hours, and then hearing the cleaners coming in to make that big poster and start work on that. But I remember a couple of us being in there and working on the Apple Mac, because we thought we can't use an Amstrad for this publication because it's just so ropey, so we'll have to use an Apple Mac. but the problem was we'd never used an open mic before. So it was like the computer and us and fags and a few hours, you know, and just this sort of idea of generating things, you know, without any knowledge, I think probably sums up this whole period. But at the exhibition launch of the Women's Own Annual, we had Polaroids as well, and I was thinking about other technologies that we were using at the time, and I do remember us getting a Polaroid, and I found this image of the way that people at the show would photograph things that they were interested in, or photograph each other next to works. And yeah, I suppose just sort of, there's lots of information on the GWO website now about Castlemont Woman House, so I won't speak about it a lot, but I do think that was a remarkable, lasting legacy of this period. It was part of this women in profile period, and happily there are some images, not just of the space, but also of, again, fundraising that we were doing at the time. So this is Rachel Harris, one of the 3 women who were sort of coordinating Castlemont Woman House, but with this T-shirt, Jobs for the Girls, which was used to sort of fundraise, but it also spoke to Elspeth King's displacement from the People's Palace, which was happening at the time that you can read about if you're interested. So I suppose it's that sort of idea of having to generate the money whilst doing the work as well. I really wanted to surface this idea of labour involved. But fortunately there is quite a lot of documentation of not just the artworks in Castlemont Woman House that you can see on the website, but also workshopping that's been happening as well. And I know that there's now a counsellor in Castlemont who's really interested to sort of focus back on this period, and for us to sort of maybe connect with more of the young women and the children who were involved in that project. I'm going to focus a little bit on some of the other artists who were involved in the Women's Own Annual. So Helen Flocker, who a number, some of you may well be aware of, and Sam had another work in the Women's Own Annual as well. These are some sort of shots of the interior. So this was a space that was, as I say, it was a place that we're having our discos in, but it's the old assembly room at Glasgow School of Art, and it hadn't really been used awful much before this. It was not a space that was regularly used, so it was really, really difficult to make the space suitable for works to be shown. And I can't even remember, I don't know who made this work. It's not in the annual, but clearly we've shown banner works as well. I don't know if you know anything about this, Jane. It's just, it's just so, I suppose it's so sobering just to sort of think this is a period that's not so long ago, but how quickly things are lost. But we will find out. It's just interesting to sort of see what was actually in the show. So yeah, I suppose just sort of thinking about after 1990, even though people were knackered and spent and really, really exhausted after this sort of titanic period of activity, during 1990 we'd had a visit from other women's libraries and archives, and we really were inspired to sort of move forward with Women's Library as a sort of idea. So again, sort of, I suppose, documenting the space. This is round the corner from the original Women in Profile space, and you can see there, sorry for keeping jumping up, how we'd use slides to sort of like make these curtains again. That's the logo again in the on the windows. And then I've discovered, just in preparation for this event, because loads of these slides, as I say, have not been shown before, there's loads and loads of images of the early, they've not even been mounted yet, of the launch event in the Women's Library, which is just going to be great going back and looking at those. But I thought this was interesting that sitting on the shelf, on the top shelf above Kate in the middle, there's the carousel like this one and the slide projector. So even though we didn't have any cash, we clearly had, because slide projectors are quite expensive, I don't know how we ever got it, but there's our slide kit sitting up there. And then when I'd been in America, I'd gone to it's just an unbelievable coincidence, but Lesbian Avengers had started up on the first trip to New York, so I'd gone to Lesbian Avengers gathering and brought back all the logo kit and everything. So again, just looking, if you look on the Women's Library website, you'll see us marching, Lesbian Avengers marching with, a banner. Well, this is a slide that we use to project onto the boat in order to sort of like have that really lovely looking logo. So again, just sort of thinking about how slides were used in that agit-prop way. This was towards the end, when we'd established Women's Library, we did keep Dalhousie Lane on for a little while, and I think this was the very last show that took place in that old space, and it was by an artist called Fred Brock. So this is sort of 1992, but I suppose again just sort of like that idea of using these spaces as alternative sites for art installation. I mean, I think this is quite an ambitious work to do in a space that was wholly unsuited for showing work, how people could use their imagination. That object in the background is that stove that I mentioned earlier on, and by that time we'd mosaicked it with old bits of old crockery. I'm coming to the end now, and I suppose I just wanted to very quickly sort of acknowledge the context again that we were working in at the time, which was where there was this dominance of the Glasgow boys, so that was during the whole 1990 period. There was this lionising of Glasgow's culture in very, very particular ways, and the way that the Glasgow boys were sort of almost like set up to be part of the regeneration, cultural regeneration story was very, very palpably there for us. And I remember making this slide and other slides because at that point I'm working at the art school and running a course called Gender, Art and Culture. Hilary Robinson had run a course before me, but passed me the sort of feminist baton. So I would start to incorporate some of the slides that we've been using and these other concepts into my teaching. So I suppose, and then sort of passing it back as well. So some of the slides would make their way into crit sessions as well outside. So this sort of idea of the works that were being promoted at the time were the antithesis really of the type of work that we were doing and we were interested in. So works by Ken Curry, not that I've got anything against Ken Curry or any of the Glasgow boys to be honest, but it was just almost like, well, that's not the only story here. So again, I've mentioned earlier on about the way that we're almost like, I would be using a slide like this in the context of the art school with students who were, that was the only place really that feminist teaching was going on in historical and critical studies, but also using the same slides in discos, you know what I mean? And I've been incorporating, this is when the Glasgow Girls publication came out, so this is taken from Jude Burkhouse's work, so just trying to sort of show the way that lacing in, of incorporating immediately that into the teaching, but also sort of maybe that could have been a slide that would be used in some of our events as well. And this is from 1990, and I suppose this is what we were trying to, it wasn't just the Glasgow boys, it's just this is, you know, the banality and the reductive gendering, the relentless sort of like, the idea of women being decorative, all the things that now it's just like, duh, you know, like, for goodness sake, it's just so obvious, but we were really mobilised around this. It was really still a pervasive dogma and orthodoxy that we just had to do something to critique. So some of the things that have been happening in the States 20 years before were only starting to be done in Glasgow at this time, and I happened to be the first to admit in a very naive way by myself and others, but at least we were doing it, you know what I mean? And I don't know whether this is Alison Watt, and I really, really like Alison, and I'm hoping that she's forgiven me for doing so, but I did actually do quite a sort of polemical critique of Glasgow boys and Glasgow girls at the time. The first article journal article that I'd ever written, and I did incorporate this slide because I suppose here we're looking at actual artists who are being cast in a certain mode by male artists, and I suppose I was just sort of feeling like something had to be drawn attention to here about this sort of gendered notion of boys and girls, you know, in this type of way. And I suppose just sort of noting that in the early 90s, we start to get obviously Maud's work is being shown, but also we get visits to Glasgow by artists like Charlie Berman, who ended up staying in Sue, the co-director's flat for the period of time she was working in. So like how these lovely, and did workshops for us in the Women's Library. So I think Chyla's visit was the very first time that an artist of colour was coming to Glasgow, not introduced by us or nothing to do with us, but through CCA or Third Eye Centre at the time, and starting to note the way that there were more plural artists and representations actually starting to filter into not necessarily the art school, but in other cultural concepts as well. And just to sort of say, like, I know now there has been a bit of a reclamation through, well, certainly the work that Sophie's been doing for a long time, but everybody will know, I'm sure, that the Women in Revolt show, you know, is speaking to some of these erasures, but also sort of some of the pioneers that were doing work. And I remember just being so arrested by Leslie Sanderson's work. But the Women in Revolt show is the very first time I'd seen that work live. You know, like, it just actually made me feel like crying, because I've been teaching this work at the art school for years and years and years, and then to only see it like this year, you know, I suppose it's just this sort of like watershed time when we can walk through a space like this, or go to Women in Revolt and actually be with the works, you know. And the same wishes with this, well, you know, you can see that this is not an original, this is from a book, you know, and it's like, I've got to, that has to be incorporated into teaching. Or Schneemann, you know, if you're ever interested, I've got all the slides that I used to use in these, you know, like in the carousel still sitting, you know, so it's like what was being taught and how we were doing that. This is Annie Sprinkle. I thought I'd include some slides, so it's queer works as well that we're looking at and getting, you know, into around this period. Annie Sprinkle did a performance in the Women's Library very, very early on, and we got some angry letters about that from some feminists. And then we've got the final couple of slides, and the only reason why I wanted to do this was in a lot of the work that I was doing at the art school at Straddle and the Women's Library stuff, you know, it's these sort of like binary representations of both whiteness, man, women, all these different types of binary configurations. But we'd actually started doing for the first time, myself and Kate, and one instance that I just wanted to reference very briefly, and then I'll shut up. We'd actually been asked for the very first time to do workshops with women, other than this sort of spontaneous work that we were doing in Women in Profile. And we were invited to work with a group in Paisley, a group of women in Paisley. And I used slides there. So the slides that I'd got of these binary representations, or these sort of almost like mythologised representations of women from art history, I took the slides and we did this work projecting them onto some of the women in the workshops. And I'd also got invited at that time, and Sophie's got a recording of this. Sam Ainsley had invited me to do some workshops as well with students at the art school. So this was not historical and critical studies, this was before that, working with students, and again we were using slides. So we were using things like slides of the Raft of the Medusa, and the students would have to try and get in the poses just to sort of sense the artifice of these different types of representations. So I thought that was quite interesting. You can see, well, maybe you can't, but it's a Mona Lisa. So I really, really like this idea of using slides to project. So we did this as well for party nights in the library as well, where we'd use sheets and have different things projected onto us. So anyway, I think that's enough just now. I'm aware that I've been talking probably past some people's bedtimes, so I will shut up just now. So I just wondered, are there any questions, any thoughts, any... Yes, please.
I was literally going to ask a question, which was there live stuff happening in the slide shows? Yeah, but we kind of covered that, but I wondered, like at the group crits, if there was use of the slides as the material or form, like was there interactive stuff at the crits as well like this? You mentioned like drawing, tracing, and stuff like that.
No, I don't remember. I think it was more like, I don't think we'd have called it consciousness raising, but it ended up being more like, slide criticism. On every register, I think there was a lot of criticism going on. That was more criticism of the context that we found ourselves working in, rather than assuming critical appraisals of other work. I think it was more an opportunity to almost like coach each other to continue to make work in particular ways. Have you got a memory, Jane, of what it was for you? Do you remember?
Yeah. What I do remember, I mean, it's interesting when I was thinking about space, because I remember the relationships in space for me when it just being was very, and consciousness, the kind of like, yeah, we're actually talking about this stuff now, because it wasn't just visual artists. I lived in a flat in Milton Street. I don't know if you remember, it was actually all women, 6 of us.
Was it Wilma? Was Wilma one of the...
She wasn't actually a woman in that flat at the time.
Right.
But I remember having a meeting in our flat, which would have been a response to these other meetings.
Yes.
Mathematics would have been interesting. But they weren't all art people. I mean, there's Alexandra Gaffney actually worked at the National Library. So I remember her being involved. And we was having these meetings that we were all like, you know, sort of talking about this stuff now.
Because Jane's address features, the Wilton Street address features in the newsletter as well. Like the next meeting will be at the Wilton Street, and I think it's
people from the art school at times, obviously people moved around, but that's my memory that not everybody, it was like it was spreading into other areas, and during that time prior to me being into that was really kind of galvanising.
It was.
And people were actually saying, yeah, we do need to do something.
And also Kate Henderson, I mentioned earlier on, who was heavily involved in setting up the Women's Library, was a co-founder of the Women's Library, was through Glasgow Uni. You know, so there were, and was heavily involved. I was talking to somebody the other day about this, about some of the activism that she got me involved in, and obviously some of the other women that we're speaking about were involved in the slide meetings. At the time, Glasgow Uni used to have one night a week. The male students had porn screening nights, you know, and it's not like the type of porn that maybe now is sex positive stuff that people, you know, feminists are supposed to have. This is like old school porn. This is, you know, yeah, stuff to protest around. So we would be protesting outside. It was in the Union building, you know, so it's in the Glasgow University Union building, because it was a men's union and the women's union at the time. It was a men's union every Tuesday night, whatever it was porn screening night. But also I remember her mobilising us to go on a protest in Tennant's Bar, which some of you will know in the West End, or some of you might know in Glasgow. It's a sort of like student drinking bar. But that was one of a number of pubs where you couldn't get pints if you're a woman, and they didn't have a women's loo, you know. So it was like, we obviously, there was a big drinking culture amongst a lot of the women that I remember at the time. But so there was a sort of like double incentive really to protesting and having a drink as well. But yeah, there was a lot of like proper feminist activism going on across these different groups. You're absolutely right, Jane. And musicians as well, so Olive Millen and lots of other women got involved who were heavily involved in promoting women in music, and women in theatre got involved as well. It was like this sort of wellspring of energy. I think a lot of us had been told, and certainly women who, obviously I'm an English woman, but a lot of women I think had been told, because of socialism in the city, that we had to postpone the feminist revolution until the class revolution had come. You know, and yeah, I certainly knew women who had been told that. So I think there was something about really, do we have to, you know, but actually a lot of people, once they got the teeth into it, were really very much involved. So I remember Anne Vance being, you know, people who were involved in filmmaking as well. Lots of people sort of cohering around this idea of, you know, this is a time when change really needs to take place. Any other things that people are wondering about? Yes, please.
Sorry. Thanks very much for your talk. It was really fascinating and incredible seeing these older images, and that you're talking about the energy. And I was just wondering at what point, and I'm sure there's still a lot of energy, but you know, what you were talking about, kind of having to fundraise and really hard work. At what point did you begin to get properly supported, if you ever have done that?
Yeah, I mean, I must sort of make a note really at this point that for some, so I mentioned about the 3 women who were running Woman House. There were very many people involved in Woman House, and loads of different artists who were devoting a hell of a lot of time and energy, and it was difficult to, you know, for those who weren't Castlemaine based, to be getting on 2 buses and or doing whatever and being in Castlemaine. You know, a hell of a lot of energy involved in that, and I think they speak really eloquently on our website, and a work that Kate Davis did, thinking about Woman House and interviewing some of the women involved in it, about really burning out, you know, really just having to stop working on that project. And I think a few of us who were involved in setting up the library, the energy, you know, the sort of desire for it, you know, selfishly as well, like, you know, you were doing fundraising things because it was exciting as well. It wasn't just sort of labour to sort of do, you know, a means to an end. It was enjoyable and there was good fun in it and so on and so forth, but it was absolutely exhausting. And as I said, I think the first 10 years were all volunteers, and then it took a long time. I think seriously it probably took until, you know, maybe 15 or 20 years into the project before there was any type of reasonable recognition. I think that Sarah Lowndes was the first person I could think of who actually almost historicised, as I sort of like noted that was a thing that happened and that had some value and it was sort of part of a Glasgow scene, but it's remarkably late in the day really to do that. And by that time you're unemployable in any other capacity, so you might as well just sort of stick in there. You know, and I've heard that from others as well who decided to do this type of work, that it's not as if it's a career. You know, I am astonished that has actually been the result of this work, that, you know, now in Women's Library, I think that just of last week, I think there are 22 people involved, employed in the organisation, and that's gone down from 26, not because of cuts or anything like that, but just because we're rethinking about the organisation. But we did have our first person retire from the Women's Library last week or the week before, you know, and I am trying to gracefully exit, so my days have reduced and so on and so forth. So, and hence, you know, my appetite to do this type of work, you know, because I think when you reach a certain age or an organisation reaches a certain age, it's really important because of the sort of difficulties in incubating organisations like this now, to sort of like really think, so how did it endure? Why did it carry on? You know, what is it that is about the ways that women are working together that means that it could endure? Because so many projects just schism or disappear. We schismed as well. We schismed from another project earlier on as well. So there's these sort of real points of jeopardy. But I suppose the learning thing, I'm really interested in like organisations that are seeding now or are you know, at an early stage surviving. So the more that we can really understand this, I think the better. Any other thoughts? Yes.
Hi, so Lucas, a question. How hard was it, also thank you, that doesn't make sense. How hard was it to get into using slides?
To get into using them? Do you know what, I think I had to be reminded today how to, thank you for helping me technically. I'd forgotten exactly like which way around they go and all that type of stuff, but it just, I suppose that example of like going into a space late at night and working out how to use an app and I'm the least technically adept person, and seriously all my colleagues will laugh at even the thought of me masquerading as somebody who could know how to do these things. But I think expediency and the need to do something, the need to learn how to do something quickly, I do think that is the beauty of an arts training. I do think if there's one thing that the art school was helpful for in terms of thinking about this myself, I think that all the people I knew who were arts trained were up for making things happen and had transferable skills. And I suppose that sort of idea of like, oh yeah, we can make a library, how hard will that be? You know, we don't have any skilled library people, or we don't have anybody who's ever run an archive, but you'll notice on one of the slides of the original Women's Building, it says Women's Library, the Scottish Women Artists and Writers Archive. And I think if anybody had said to us what is an archive, none of us would have been confident in saying what that actually was. but there was sort of something there about we need to sort of safeguard women's creative work, you know, that it's not been safeguarded, it is being weeded, it has been destroyed, but I think the making of the slides, I think I had a very, I had a fantastic champion in Lynn, because she showed me how to use a copy camera, and you know, you can tell the slides that I've made that don't use a copy camera, they're so unbelievably ropey. But some of them that are using a copy camera, does everybody know what a copy camera is? So it's a we've got one now in the Women's Library. I'm sure all my colleagues just sort of thought, oh God, indulge it. It's like, we need a copy camera. Now it's completely stupid, redundant thing to use, but it's almost like a plate with a frame with a camera mount, and the camera is pointed down the way, and in each of the corners of this plate you can move this sort of thing up and down depending on the size of the image that you want to make a slide of, but at each corner there's an intense light source, so you get a no shadow, you know, and it's like the best condition. So as long as you have it, Lynn showed me, you know, like what's the setting for the slide, what is the slide film that you need to use, and she had hundreds and hundreds of slide films that was rapidly used up by me. Yeah, so you would just load the film, you would take the images, and then you would have to go through the labour of taking it to Jessop's, or taking it, I think before Jessop's, I can't remember where we used to take it, but then it would have been like 3 days or a week or whatever before you got it back. And it would be much more costly to get them mounted. And we've noticed going through the collection that there's loads of strips, as I say, that haven't been even cut or mounted. So hence my joy when I found these slide mounts in a skip once. It was like, those mounts mean that we can get loads and loads of slides made without mounts, which would be a lot less expensive. But it's a very simple technology, you know, it is just, just photographing, using a certain type of film.
If you're interested, if you're studying here, they have a copy camera. Jane in the photo studio has one. I used it to create some slides for this show.
This is actually my first time actually hearing about them, which is it sounds to me.
If you speak to Jane in
I'm
the
definitely going to look into it. It seems very interesting. It inspired me.
Fast forward degree show, slide, reclaiming the slide.
I just never know that was a thing to actually do.
It's
I
fun.
think there's things that you can know about the slideshow, because that sound obviously for me completely resonates, and I got that click and thing moving around, so there may be something about the whole experience that's so different to what, I mean, I teach at my university, and it's we're very kind of visual based, but it's a completely different experience now. We sort of, we know what you'll get. Look at these huge big screens with incredible images, or it's awfully flat, and see the way that's sitting right now, Adele, I just love it, because they're all slightly wonky, then when it'll come in, it'll be upside down, or back to front, or
Exactly.
there's something really nice about
The tangibility, you know,
exactly.
the physicality,
The materiality.
and also the performative. It's really interesting. And I'm sitting here watching you operating the slide. It's like a performance, but also I think that perhaps encourage this kind of interaction between humans, between bodies. To me, that's something quite special now, thinking about, you know, how slides could bring people together.
Definitely.
It's such a wonderful way of like preserving language that could mean so much to someone.
Absolutely. You were going to add something else,
It was the same when you handed the photocopy, because I mean again it's just like, for us a photocopy was a completely mind-blowing piece of equipment. I had no idea how it worked. I was just like, have you seen this thing? It's in the library, and we actually got one up, David Harvey must have gone up in the as well. And I can remember people That's
Exactly.
what I meant.
Exactly.
You know, but it's just so when you handwrite it, there's something about the kind of text even.
Yeah.
The kind of print because we don't have access to sort of multiplicity of visual culture that we've got today. So in some ways, it's quite interesting. I think that they're just handwritten things as well.
And I don't know if has somebody got the book, because I wanted to show the little book. So I wanted to show you because it should be said, just in terms, I suppose in terms of thank you very much, that that we made this, we made all the copies of it, so I don't, God knows how many we made, but these little things, I think I'd seen Sininova's text, but these sort of snap apart and then you put them up. So I think we did get these die cut. I don't think we punched all the holes, but it came in all the sheets. So we had to construct and make all those books. So it's not even, it's like all the labour is sort of quite, but it's really helped it. But I think as well, Jenna, that memory, I'm so pleased that you said about the sound, because my partner had heard me loading this and was again like, oh God, that sound, oh my God, the sound of the slides getting dropped in. Not the clicking, just actually going into the carousel. I've heard it 1,000 times before and I'd not heard it, for many, many years, and then I'd heard it again and it was like a really Proustine or whatever it is when it's something. But I think also we would show them tonight, we would get the opportunity to see this in relation to this work, but I think we'd always have all the lights off, so you'd get the full light of the colour, the saturated colour. And as I say, I think when we were looking at them again for this little pilot thing in the library when we were doing the 30th anniversary work and getting some of the slides out, it really, I think my colleague had never seen the slide projected before, almost like she was really, really interested in the technology of it and what she was looking at. I said, wait till you see the colour saturation. We put it up and I was like, oh God, it's just so interesting how our whole optics, appreciation of optics and colour and everything has completely and utterly changed, that we could have thought that these were lush in extremis, that there could never be anything as gorgeous as a slide image in terms of colour, and realising now it's not just because they're worn and old. I think that this is what we were looking at and this is what we were seeing. I don't think they fade. I'm not sure if they fade like photographs fade. Maybe that's something I can find out about. But
Can I ask a quick
yes, of course.
There's one here after.
Just a very quick one, because obviously when you first started this group, and it was an alternative to
Yes.
me in the context of the exhibition. It's an alternative sort of pedagogical space.
Yes, definitely.
Opposed to the art school.
Yeah.
But now it's a very well-known institution, Women's Library, Glasgow Women's Library. I guess when you first started, there always this kind of edginess, this sort of alternative ethos, self-organised group. How now we are more established institution, how do you maintain that kind of unsettledness?
Yeah, it's funny because there's one or two colleagues who have really boldly, in a radically candid way, said to me, so what happened, where did your politics go? It's really seriously, and it just made me smile a little bit because now, but I think it's really great when questions are asked like that, they're being thought about by lots of others as well, so you really have to attend to these moments when maybe something registers as a sort of slight criticism, like, a co-option or whatever it might be. And I suppose now I feel I'm a very different person, but I do feel like the edginess is in a different place. So although I still like being active, you know, and I still like demos and I still like some of the things that I was doing, you know, when I was a young woman, I'm now very interested in, I was talking actually to Sophie a little bit about this earlier on about, I suppose now I feel like it's really interesting to see an organisation that is not, it is independent, so there isn't another organisation like the Women's Library in the UK, a women's resource, excuse me, that is not part of a university, because there are quite a number of women's collections that are part of the university and they're great, but it's not still, as it were, grassroots, so it's not mainly volunteer run. We are an independent resource that doesn't have core funding from any one source. You know, we have different types of funders. So if one funder pulls out, I mean, I'm really resistant to say this now because of the jeopardy that there is in the arts, but you know, we will survive. And but I suppose what I'm really interested in is, so what is this thing, you know, and what, you know, back to this sort of question of like, what can we learn from something that's survived? And as I exit, I know that it will be thriving and developing and blooming and blossoming type of thing. So I know because of the ecology of the organisation that will happen. And I suppose what I'm really interested in is, at this point when we're seeing a resurgence of patriarchy, we're seeing a resurgence of command and control, strongman leadership, the threats to human rights and the infringements on social justice, and lots of the equality campaigns that are threaded through a lot of the work that we're seeing here. There's no scope for complacency whatsoever. So if we don't want that, what do we want in terms of alternative ways of organising? And I know this is something that Sophie's done and the team have done so much work around, but I suppose we have it here in Scotland. We have one of these here in Scotland, and I think that's a source of excitement for me, and I think actually there's something deeply exciting and politically interesting and radical about this, about the idea of a feminist institution. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, I wouldn't be saying that if we had been, you know, if we were the Royal Incorporation of Feminists, you know, or like part of Glasgow Uni or something like that. I wouldn't be presuming to say that, but I do think there's something interesting about that feels political in another way. And, you know, I think in terms of, I meet a lot of students now who are art students, so curatorial students, so those thinking about working within an arts culture, and I feel really, really deeply for a lot of feminists who are doing that, because the alternative seems to be working for the man, so working for the Tate, for example, or working, you know, working for whoever, or setting up your own organisation. And it feels like, oh God, the labour is still there, you know, that must be tough to do now. As I say, more tough, I think, to do that now than when we were doing it, because we were finding ways to be on schemes that would pay us 30 quid a week that you could survive on, pretending to do something else in order to work at the Women's Library. Or there'll be other ways that, you know, I work part-time at the art school, as I've mentioned. But, you know, there were spaces that were subsidised spaces. You could just take on old buildings and old spaces, which we did for many, many years, that were peppercorn type rent. I think it's more difficult to do this work now. So I suppose it's like, you know, how can we learn from not just Women's Library, but lots of other enduring feminist projects, and find ways of imagining what the alternatives, the counterculture could actually be. Anyway, I think so. I don't know if that answered your question, Sophie, but I don't feel like it's been like, oh, we're now, comfortable and everything's rolling along. There's still deep challenges about things like hierarchy, about things like decision making, about, founder syndrome and all these different things. We talk about these things,
I think you definitely answered that.
Oh.
The audio recording as the entrance from Audre Lorde, there's one quote that actually really sustained me throughout the most difficult time. She literally said, never settle.
Yeah.
Never settle. I think that's your answer, your answer.
Totally.
Was photography used as a way to capture what you were doing as well? So when I think about this as an archive,
Yeah.
is there a complementary work that is also associated with it? That's one question. And the second one is, I wonder if you could just say a little bit more about the work you said that some students were doing. So are you creating an archive or a catalogue or
Yes.
of this?
Yeah. So, do you mean in the first part of your question, is there a complementary photographic, alongside the slide images, as there was a photographic record? There's actually not an enormous amount of photography. Looking at the records of Women in Profile of the big festival that we have, there's hardly anything. And I don't know whether we weren't, I certainly wasn't assuming this is a historically significant thing that's happening now, and we're all going to be historically, doing something that people will be interested in the future. It never crossed my mind, and I think seeing when our German counterparts came over for part of the Women's Library Festival, we did have these women's libraries come over from Germany, and they were bristling with kit, with cameras and big, massive, great big video cameras. And they documented a lot of things. And so as a result of that, we do have some moving image records, which are really, really amazing. But they did take some photographs, and we took a few. But now, any significant thing you would organise to have documentation. And of course, we've got phones. We didn't have digital phones. We didn't have digital image making kit at all. So there's actually probably more slides, and I suppose it was because at least the latter part of the slide making thing, I could do that with the art school. I mean, I'm sure I'm going to get a visit from the police at some point, because the art school, I'm sure, are very much more litigious now than they were at the time. It was Lynn McLaughlin, by the way, Lynn McLaughlin, who was helping me. Maybe I shouldn't have said her name. Maybe there could be some redacting of her name, but I'm sure if I'd had an endless amount of photographic and a camera would have been handy for taking photos on. But I'm sure there were some people with cameras, like I know Christina McBride, there were fine art photographers in our midst who were brilliant. Louise Bradley, the PhotoWorks crew, but we weren't really taking very many photos of each other. I did show a few photographs of the PhotoWorks people, and they're the best ones, and of course they're going to be because they were photographers. But there's no images of us sitting around and doing the slide meetings. I mean, we'd never have thought that we should photograph each other doing that. And actually, if I'm thinking about it, I'm sure the American counterparts would have been photographing each other, sitting around doing that type of thing. So, no is my thought. But now, the archivists in the Women's Library are coming up with stuff all the time, they're finding things, and you know, there are likely to be people out there who might have been taking photographs. My mum is the best chronicler of the Women's Library. I mean, she took millions and millions of photos. A lot of them have gone into the library already, but she's hanging on to quite a lot of more stuff. So I'm sure ultimately there will be more stuff going into the library that is photographs, but they weren't done by professional photographers or people documenting it. And remind me of the second part of the question.
Oh yeah. So you mentioned about you had some students
Yes.
working. I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about what you're doing.
So there was a moment where we were thinking about the idea of the 30th anniversary coming up. And I suppose I'm also thinking about getting all this stuff out of my head and making sure that it's part of the institutional knowledge, which might conflict with other people's memories as well. So this is me speaking not with an authorial voice, but with just from what I feel like I'm remembering. But I suppose in the interests of feminist leadership, it's important that there's nothing that has not been placed down for others, you know, before I leave the Women's Library. I don't want to be holding on to anything if it might be useful. So we put in a bid to the Heritage Lottery Fund just in the nick of time and managed to get some funding. So that funding funded a sequence of work that was, some of it was exhibitions, some of it was a digitisation of some of this stuff, that really scratched the surface. So we did quite a lot of stuff. Interestingly, my colleagues, the people who were managing this were people who weren't around, and it was just so amazing to see what they were doing. That what they wanted to do was they wanted to recreate, I showed you an image of the first women's library, the shops where there was the carousel on the shelf. It was a tiny, tiny wee space. And they wanted to sort of recreate that in the women's library of today. And it was beautiful, but it was pristine, you know. And what I remember was the fog of smoke and the really scruffiness of it, and so on, and bikes being in there, and soup being made, and all that type of stuff. So it was very sweet the way that they were doing it. But what was of interest to them was principally the pre-digital technologies. So we did have a slide projector thing there, we did have a fax thing in the room, we did have an Amstrad and the early VHS thing all out, because, and also card index stuff, and you know, like really low-tech technologies as well that we were using. So the person who was looking at the slides last time, just almost like in preparation for this little mini slide, I think we only used 12 slides, as I mentioned earlier on, for that first session. But that was a very long-suffering and lovely German student who happened to be on placement with us around this period where we're looking at our history. And she'd never seen slides before, and that should have disqualified her from doing the work on the slide collection. But we thought, oh no, that's great if somebody could do that who didn't know what it is, you know, and can ask these questions. Unfortunately, she did go down some rabbit holes, as I say, looking at inscriptions that had no bearing. But she did do a lot of really good work. Like, she noticed that I'd showed some images earlier on of the Glasgow girls, and she noticed that they were images that had been used in the Wassell Women Artist Slide Library newsletter, you know, and like how there was some of these correlations with some things that she was finding in journals. So it's always great to have somebody who has come in with no knowledge and can ask what they're thinking are daft questions, but they're not daft at all. They are the key questions. So, but we now have collections team members, so they are really working with a lot of this stuff now. it will take ages because everything moves at a glacial pace in Women's Library. But Sophia and Peter and colleagues here have been lovingly using some things, and that's given us an excuse to even add, although the 30th anniversary project is over. I think because Sam Ainsley had been involved in this work, Sam had contacted us and said, when did that happen? When did that, you know? So for us now we're sort of thinking, can we add to the 30th anniversary thing? So in that instance, we got Sam and Women's Library and recorded our conversation, trying to remember a little bit more about the overlap between art school, slide library, slide criticism workshops and so on. Can you remind me, Joan, what department you were in? Environmental art, right, of course.
You came and spoke to us. You were in your masters for Janice.
Yes,
And that
exactly.
was, I suppose, the point at which you were beginning to maybe get to know the students in that department, which was a brand new department. So
That's
there was
right.
maybe an opportunity there, because you might have been looking for students. I know what these things are like now. You look for spaces where there's an open door.
So that has added a beautiful missing link
Right.
to the conversation. The recording between me and Sam talking about that when we went in and worked with you is there.
It's been me, Fiona, Gurley, and Louise Scullion.
Louise Scullion.
Tracy, I've forgotten the second name, but it's not that many. I mean, there were other women in the department,
Yeah.
and they're particularly here. Also,
Yeah.
there's Kristen Bowen, there's a whole load of names here that are very familiar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that's when you took the bait.
Yes,
I think when we made it so
absolutely. Absolutely. And it was just like, wait a minute.
yeah.
So it was very powerful.
Oh, that's so good to hear. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to Sophie, to Peter, to Ron, to all the whole team here for doing this incredible work. And again, really, really appreciate what you're doing. And it's groundbreaking and it's really important. I think just to feel valued in this way is just like means the world, you know. So thank you, Alison. Thanks to everybody for turning out on such an appallingly freezing night, and thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.